for me also to engage with you if you're not quite as spread out. And the reason we love 4 people per table is it allows for discussion, all right? So if we could get 4 people per table, if we could just move around a little bit, and that would be fantastic. If we just kind of spread around, get 4 people per table, and try to fill up these center ones as well. I'll give you just a moment to do that. Folks, we've got a table right here in the center that could use some people yet. If you want to move to this center table, I'm not going to be mean about this. I want to make sure that we get into groups. We have discussion happening. All right, I hope you had a good break. We are going to keep moving, and our next break is going to be at 11 o'clock this morning. If I keep rocking and rolling and I forget about the break, you can all just start standing up, all right? And that'll be my signal. Luke, it's time for another break. All right, well, welcome back. Welcome back to those of you that are watching online, and hopefully you got your coffee and donut as well. We've been talking about the 3 temptations to become a leader worth following. Becoming a leader worth following. To overcome those temptations, we need to choose to do the right thing the right way every time. That consistency is what makes us a leader worth following. Our title and position doesn't necessarily make us a leader. Nothing wrong with a title or a position, but that's not what makes us a leader. What makes us a real leader is that we become somebody worth following. And we do that by conquering the 3 temptations. And now that leads us to the next one, which is one-on-one leadership where trust is built. Look at Jesus' model. Right after the 3 temptations, he goes down to the beach and he begins to invite people to join him. He goes to a tax collector, invites him to join him, right? He's building that one-on-one relationship with his disciples. And the text states that when he asked these people to follow him, they would drop everything and go after it, which is kind of fascinating. If I ask somebody to give up their security, give up their job, right? Like Peter, James, and John, they're fishermen, and they throw down their nets, they throw down their boats, and they go and they follow him. That's pretty amazing. Now, what we need to understand is that those young men by the seaside, when they were fishing, when Jesus, the young rabbi, walks by and invites them, they already recognize him as somebody worth following. He was a 30-year-old man. He was somebody that had distinguished himself as a godly person in their community, and they were honored to be invited to follow him. It's not the onus, we always put it on the disciples. It's not about the disciples were amazing people. They threw down their nets, they threw down their boats, they threw down everything, they gave up their security. Wow, these guys were amazing. Look at these disciples, look at the costs they're willing to pay. No. We're missing the point of the story. The real issue, if you understand Jewish culture, when a young rabbi walks by and invites you to come, you need to know that the fishermen, the tax collector were on the bottom of the totem pole. They are the last people that a rabbi would invite to come follow them. They've already been through rabbinical school and they've failed. They haven't memorized well enough. And so the rabbis have all told them, you guys need to go out and just, be fishermen, and that's okay. That's a good vocation, but you aren't blessed with mental acumen. You're not smart enough. You're not wise enough. You're not good enough to be trained in the higher schools of thinking and theology and influence, right? And Jesus comes to those who had been considered unworthy and invites them. The onus is on Jesus. Jesus is the one that they are honoring. So again, the question is, are you someone worth following? Will people climb mountains for you? And I'm not talking about literal mountains. I'm talking about, will they do hard things with you? Will they go through challenges with you? Can you invite people to do crazy, crazy things because you are a leader worth following? Will people climb? Will people go? Will they risk? That depends on whether or not you are a leader or a mom or a dad worth following. Look at the story of Peter and Jesus. And I know when we ever talk about the story of Peter walking on water, we kind of give Peter a hard time. Peter, you looked at the wind, you looked at the waves, you could have been walking on water. Man, what's wrong with you, right? And I want to just tell you something. All the rest of the disciples were boat potatoes. Peter's the only dude that got out of the boat, okay, and walks on water. And even after he failed, it says Jesus instantly picks him up, right? Because that's what a trusting leader does. And that in this one-on-one leadership, you can trust your leader to pick you up. It says he instantly reached out and picked him up. We don't know how far Peter got from the boat, all right? We really don't know until he got his eyes on the wind and waves. But he got away from the boat, and Jesus was instantly there. And then you got to remember, he also had to walk back to the boat. So Peter actually walked on water 2 times. So don't ever forget that. Don't give Peter a hard time because he's got walking on water on his resume. And I only know of one other person, and that's Jesus, besides Pete, all right? So it took tremendous courage and faith for him to step out of the boat, but that's what you do when you're at the second level of leadership, and you are a person worth following. You know your leader is going to be there for you. They're going to pick you up. There's a great story from IBM. Anybody remember IBM back in the days when we all had IBM computers and or IBM compatibles? We don't really hear that IBM term anymore, but IBM is this massive, massive computer company back in the day. I think they're in the networking or something now. And they had hired a young executive, and he came in. He had lots of ideas, lots of energy, yada, 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 let's go, let's go. And he made a mistake to the tune of $1 million. He should have talked to so-and-so. He should have done this. He should have done that. He blew it. And he gets called into the CEO's office, and he knows he's done. He knows he's fired. And he comes in stammering. I am so sorry, sir. I was brash. I should have talked to so-and-so. I should have done this. I should have done that. And I will have my desk cleaned out by noon. So sorry. The CEO took one look at him and said, "What? We've just spent $1 million educating you. Get out there and try it again." I love leadership like that. Leadership that doesn't look at Peter's failure and says, "You are a failure," but says to Peter, "Peter, you were walking on water, man. Why did you get your eyes on the wind and the waves? You can walk on water, Peter. Come on, man. Let's go back to the boat. You can do this. I believe in you." Mistakes are stepping stones towards success. Jesus had 3 years with those guys, and even up at the greatest moment, his crucifixion, they all turned tail and ran. Are you with me? And if I would have been Jesus, I would have said, "That's it. I'm starting over." Not Jesus. He comes back. Peter, who had denied him 3 times, Jesus restores him 3 times. You remember that story where he says, "Feed my sheep, feed my lambs, feed my sheep"? That is for every time that Peter failed with a denial. Guys, I'm telling you, if you want to be a leader worth following, you will see failures as mistakes that people make that are ways for them to learn how to not do it in the future, to develop character in their lives, and you will help that person who made a failure not be a mistake, not see themselves as a mistake, but say, "How can I learn from this? How can I move forward from this? What can I do to not do that again?" You're a leader worth following when you help people like Peter overcome their failures. Are you with me? You don't write people off. You don't shut people down. You see the potential when they don't see the potential in them. Peter goes on to lead the early church. Peter becomes a leader worth following. Jesus had built up this tremendous trust with Peter, and Peter became a leader in the early church. He became a leader worth following. Jesus took a risk. Jesus set a precedent for Peter to follow. Chuck Colson once said this. He said, "All the kings and queens I have known in history sent their people out to die for them. I only know one king who decided to die for his people." Now, I'm not suggesting that you as a leader need to go out and die for your people. But you know, Peter was crucified upside down. All the disciples, except for Judas and for John, tradition tells us, went out and gave up their lives for the sake of Jesus. They all saw what Jesus had done for them, every one of them. My question to you again, have you built such extraordinary levels of trust with people that they are willing to lay down their lives. They're willing to follow. They're willing to go the extra mile when the times get tough. Are they willing to do that? It depends on whether or not you depend on your title or your position, or if you depend on becoming a leader worth following. The third phase in the serving leadership journey concerns team leadership. Building effective teams. This is where trust is multiplied. This is where community is built. This is where you bring your individuals in onto a team. And Jesus had a motley group of guys from various backgrounds and careers, right? Some were fishermen. One was like an IRS guy, right? What was his name? Matthew, right? The tax collector. And then there was another guy that was a zealot. There was a group of zealots back in that day that were called the sicarii. You know what a sicarii was? It was a little sword that you strapped to your side. You were a modern day terrorist. You hated those Romans. You went out into the crowds looking for a centurion. And when you got close to that centurion, you whipped out your sicarii and you stuck him. And then you melted back into the crowd. You hated Rome. So now can you imagine a guy like Matthew, a tax collector who's collaborating with Rome, ripping off his people to build the coffers of Rome, putting a sleeping bag down beside a sicarii? If I'm Matthew, I'm going, dude, I don't know. He might stick me in the middle of the night because he hates my guts because I've been collaborating with Rome. Are you with me? And Jesus takes these guys that are so opposite, so different. And by the way, ladies, I'm so glad you're here today. So many ladies think, I'm not a leader. I want to tell you something. Jesus had women disciples. Did you know that? Jesus had women disciples. If you're watching online today and you're a lady, I want to just say bless you for seeing that you've got leadership. We all have leadership. We all have influence. Mary and Martha sat at Jesus' feet. That means they were disciples. When Jesus gave the Great Commission, he gave it to a mixed crowd. He sent them out. We are disciples. We are leaders. We are influencers, all of us. Jesus was bringing this motley group together, and then what did he do? He built them, he empowered them, he united them, and then he sent them out to turn the world upside down, we read in the book of Acts. These guys became a lean, mean teaming machine that went out and turned the world upside down. Do you lead a lean, mean teaming machine? That's actually one of the titles of my business seminar on teamwork. And I draw from Jesus and the disciples. That's one of the things I draw from. But lean, mean, and teaming machine, meaning you might be small, but boy, can you ever get things done. And not mean as in mad mean. I mean just you're lean and you're able to accomplish great things even with a small group of people. This is the disciples. Jesus multiplied that trust. He brought these guys together. He set them up for success. And the final step is the organizational leadership in your diagram. And guys, I've got passages here for everything. John 17 is that high priestly prayer where he talks about may they be one, may they be one, may they be one, like 3 or 4 times. Matthew 28 is the Great Commission where he sends them out. Jesus actually doesn't do a whole lot on the organizational leadership side. That happens after he's gone. You, my friend, are going to be termed a successful leader based on the legacy you leave. You're not going to find out about your success until after you're gone. Now, you might experience some success in this life, and I hope you do. I hope you see your grandkids, and I hope you see people take your principles and live them out. I hope that happens. I think we see some measure of our success, but real success happens after Jesus is gone. If Jesus would have stayed there at Pentecost, think about this. And there's 3,000 people there, right? Or however many people. I think 3,000 people were saved. And somebody has to get up and preach. Do you think Peter would have said, yeah, I got this. He would have gone, Jesus, you're so much better at this than me. You go in, you preach. But Jesus is gone because, folks, when I stick around, I can clip people's wings, can't I? When it comes time for my children to go out there, I need to push them out of the nest, don't I? I'm actually doing them a favor. I'm actually doing people a favor when I actually leave my role of leadership and I say to the new leaders that I've been developing over time, you got this, I'm leaving. Because if I hang around, they're going to keep relying on me. And sometimes we got to push people out. That's what Jesus did when he went back to the Father. He said, all power is given to me. I commission you guys. Now go. You can do this. You guys have got this. And you see Peter, unlearned, ignorant fishermen, the scriptures say. But they said they had been with Jesus. And these guys went out and turned the world upside down. That's where we have organizational leadership. You develop you lead yourself, you lead one-on-one, you lead a team, and you form them into an organization that can turn the world upside down. Folks, that is the story of the serving leadership journey, the 4 phases on the serving leadership journey. All right, are there any questions before we move on to the next diagram? Any questions? I've been rattling along here for a long time. And if you've got a question throughout today, folks, honestly, I'm the kind of guy that you can do like, time out, Luke, let's talk about this, and we'll talk about it, all right? All right, I'm going to keep moving on then. We're going to look at the next diagram in your notes. You're going to see the circles. Now, the idea of the circles there is really a concept of a body of water, a pool, a pond, a lake. If you take a rock, a stone, and you heave it out into the middle of a pond, it causes a ripple, doesn't it? There's like a big splash, and then that ripple causes another ripple and another ripple and another ripple. And in fact, even a little tiny stone can influence the entire surface of that pond, can't it? You will see those ripples. They might get less and less as they get to the shore, but eventually there'll be this little thing at the shoreline after you throw that little stone into that pond or pool. That's the concept here. And what I want you to write down in your notes is that you go deep with the few to impact the many. I mentioned the Italian guy Pareto a little bit earlier. This is where you spend most of your time with your key people. Jesus had some key people that he spent more of his time with than others. And this is where we have to talk about fairness. Because you know, a lot of people think that God should be fair. Did you know that God is not fair? And thank God he's not. Because if God was fair, I would not be here today. I deserve to be in hell. I don't deserve to have anything good. I don't want God to be fair. I want him to be just and righteous. And what is the righteousness and the justice of God? That he took the most righteous son and puts him on a cross, bears my unrighteousness. That's the justice and the righteousness of God, to take the most just person and to treat him unjustly on my behalf. Do I want God to be fair? I'm glad for grace. Folks, we live in a cancel culture. We live in a woke culture that says there's no hope for you after you screw up. I'm a believer of Jesus. I am so glad I can believe in forgiveness. And our society doesn't understand this. We cancel people. We write people off. We don't give people another chance. We don't help people fail forward, do we? No, we're going to cancel you. Guys, that's not the righteousness and the justice of God. You and I, this idea of fairness, let me go a little bit further on this one. Some of us, okay, I'm 5'5" 3/4 inches, all right? There's my height. Now you know. I've got it down to the 1/4 inch, okay? And I probably shrunk a little bit because I'm 51 now. But I am not Michael Jordan. I am not LeBron James. I've not been gifted with 7-foot height, 6'9", 6'8", and therefore I have no opportunity to make millions of dollars in the NBA. When I was a kid, I grew up in Canada, I was a hockey guy, all right? At age 16, I went out and I paid $250 for the top-of-the-line NHL skates. Now they're like over $1,000, okay? But I was into hockey, and I was going to play hockey, and I moved out to Western Canada. I was going to join a team. Yeah, guys, look at me. Am I going to make the NHL? I'm not going to make the NHL, all right? God, that's not fair. I'm not big. I'm not tall. I'm not going to make millions because... And I love hockey. I mean, Canadians, we grow up playing hockey in our diapers, all right? It's not fair. Life is not fair. Did you know that life is not fair? And we've got to get away from this thing demanding fairness because life was never designed to be fair. There are some people in this room who are way smarter than me. They're way better business people than me. They just have gifts and abilities that I don't have. And it's why in the human family we need each other. And you know, Jesus tells a parable. He says to one guy he gives 5 talents, another guy he gives 2, and another he gives 1. Did you know that some of us, honestly, have more gifts and abilities than others? And to whom much is given, much is required. Guys, you have a greater responsibility than I do, all right? And this idea of fairness, why are we talking about this? Because Jesus did not treat all his disciples equally. And when it comes to leadership, you guys will all get this when it comes to family. If I spend the same amount of time with my wife and kids as I do with your wife and kids, there's a problem. You can laugh at that. That's funny. That would be crazy. No, there's no way you're going to spend the same amount. We get that. But then all at once it comes to church world, business world, or whatever, and we're like, no, the leader needs to spend equal amount of time with all his people. No, Jesus didn't do it. You can't. You know why? Because you're a limited leader. You need to go deep with the few to impact the many. You can't give all of your time to all of the people. You can only go an inch deep. Jesus is teaching us a leadership principle. You got to choose some people, and that means you're not choosing some people. Did you get that? Life is not fair. Now, does that mean that everybody doesn't have equal opportunity? I think we should fight for equal opportunity. We should fight for people to have justice and righteousness. Don't misunderstand me here. But when a leader focuses in on his top 3 managers, he's following a principle of Jesus. That's why in this diagram you've got one who represents whom? It represents Jesus. Jesus is leading himself. He's the one in this circle. He's the stone that hits the surface of the earth. His influence, he leads himself, right? Then who are the 3? Peter, James, and John. If you are Matthew, if you are Simon, if you are Thaddeus, are you ever saying, oh man, why did those guys get to go up Transfiguration Mountain, get to see Moses and Elijah, and we're stuck down here in the demon-possessed valley? You ever think about that? It's not fair, Jesus. Those guys get to experience all the cool stuff, and me, I'm stuck. If you read that story, when they came off of Mount Transfiguration, the rest of the disciples were down in the valley, and they could not cast out a demon. That's the context of that story. And they're coming back, Peter, James, and John. Dudes, it was awesome. We saw Elijah. Man, we saw Moses. It was incredible. There was this cloud. There was this loud voice. And you're trying to cast out a demon, and you can't do it? Jesus, it's not fair. Folks, this is the image of Jesus on leadership, serving leaders. You know what they realize? They realize they're limited. Jesus realized he was limited. We need to realize that we're not God gifts to mankind, that we're not the ones that can lead massive things, but what we can do, and I like this. This makes sense to me. I can lead a few. I can lead a few really well. I can disciple a few up close. I can do that. We all can do that. And if I do it right, folks, I can have this ripple effect to my leadership. That's what Jesus is teaching us. Go deep with a few to impact the many, serving leadership. And I have no problem with pastors of big churches and leaders with lots of people, but when you find those leaders of big churches or big movements or big organizations, what you will find most likely is you will find a core team that he spends most of his time with. Some Italian dude named Pareto came up with the 80-20 rule, and Jesus already had it. He had the 25-75 rule. It was pretty close, right? 25% of his disciples, Pete, Jim, and John, out of the 12. He spent more time with than he did with the 12. A number of years ago, I was in Uganda, and I had been invited to join an organization. I used to be a master trainer for a nonprofit called Lead Like Jesus. It was a nonprofit that Ken and his friend Phyllis Hendry. Phyllis is a friend of mine. I don't think she's a CEO anymore. But I was with Lead Like Jesus for a number of years. I became a master trainer with them. And I went to Uganda to train African leaders. And we did it with Lead Like Jesus. Now, their model was we take this very same material that you're getting today, and we do it in a big church with a couple hundred leaders, and we try to train leaders, all right? But one of the things that we did is we had PowerPoint projectors and run by generators, okay, because we're out in the outbacks. And sometimes they'd run out of gas, or the gas would be dirty, and the generator would fail, and it was just all kinds of, and by the way, everybody in the audience, they're looking at the generator, they're looking at this crazy white guy going, I can't do that. I don't have a computer. I don't have a projector. How can I do your model of training leaders? And one of the weekends that I was there, I was asked to preach in an African church. By the way, you know when I finally arrived in life and it was several years into this, but and by the way, it's a lot easier to preach in Africa. It just is. The audience, they're awesome. Like they get excited, and you remember this. Like they're encouraging you. I finally came alive in my preaching in Africa, and I had a African pastor tell me one time. He said, Luke, he said, you're now preaching like the African. I said, now I've arrived. I can die and go to heaven. I'm good. When they you're supposed to laugh at that. I'm telling you, they are the princes of preachers. Okay, I don't know. You're a Calvary Chapel preacher. I'm sure he's fantastic, but we need to learn from the Africans how to preach. That's all I'm going to say. Here's what happened in Africa. Daniel, this guy's twice as big as me, twice as tall as me. On Sunday morning, I'm preaching at his church. He takes us into his office. He gives us Fantas. He was kind of softening us up, I think. And he says to me, and I love this. He said, you guys have great material, but you're going about it all wrong. And you know what? By that time, I knew we were going about it all wrong. I had actually made up in my mind, I'm never going back to Africa. I'm never training leaders again, because what we're doing is not training leaders. We're handing out all these diplomas. We're speaking about leadership, but we are not training and developing leaders. I already, in my spirit, I had lived in Asia for 10 years before this. I knew what movements were. I knew what discipleship was. And I'm just going, we're over here, and it looks really good. We got hundreds of people in the audience. We got projectors, and we're, people are coming, and we're feeding the people, and we're talking about leadership. We were not developing leaders, folks. We spent tens of thousands of dollars on these trips. And after a couple years, we had like 2 or 3 people that were still teaching the material. Were we developing leaders? We were not developing leaders. And Daniel saw through all the stuff. He said, give me 50 men and women who hate nothing but sin, love nothing but God. Luke, let's go deep with the few to impact the many. That was Daniel's vision. Did you know that Daniel is now our continent director? He's like the regional director of Africa now. We got directors in a number of different countries in Africa. Daniel's the main dude. Daniel's the guy that I look up to, I learn from, and he said to me, Luke, you guys have great material, you're doing it all wrong. And I was like, I like this guy because he was bold and he was kind. Most people, when you go to a foreign country, they're kind of like, we want to, keep the foreigner happy. We want to, we don't want to mess up our relationship with this guy. Not Daniel. He spoke truth. I said, I can work with this guy. My friend Fred, he's a 28-year veteran of the National Guard in Kentucky. Fred and I, we went back a year later to work with Daniel. He had handpicked like 20 leaders. We had men and women in this group, and we spent a week with them. At the end of we were teaching this material. Exactly, this material here came out of that first week of going deep with the few. And at the end of the week, we did a public event. And guess what? Fred and I sat in the back, and all the leaders we had trained, they got up and they taught all this material. It was amazing. I had if you go to my YouTube channel, you can watch a video of 2 African leaders. One's a lady, one's a guy. The one guy was like a bishop over 30 churches. He actually laid down flat in front of me on the concrete and just wept. He says, we've never seen anything like this. We always see people come to Africa telling us how to do stuff. He said, you came over and you empowered, you equipped, and then you put us up front. I learned something. I learned a lot. We learned that a model of leadership needs to be discipleship. We learned that what Jesus did with a few. Did you know that Jesus went away from the applause? He went away from the crowds. Oh yeah, he had the 5,000 here. He had the 10,000 there. But those were such minor times. Did you know that most of the time Jesus went deep with the few? Jesus spent most of his time with his disciples. Why am I telling you this? Because this is how you change the world. Oh, we can look really good standing in front of huge crowds of people, but that's not how you change the world. I want to tell you something, and this is all to the glory of God. I worked with about 30 or 40 leaders in about 4 different African nations. All right, we've been to Ghana, we've been to Cameroon, we've been to Liberia, we've been to Uganda, I've been to South Africa, we've been to a number of countries in Africa. I personally have only worked with about 20, 30 leaders in those countries, all right? But today, we've lost count. There's over 30,000 leaders that have been trained throughout Africa. That's to the glory of God. That's not anything we did. What we did is we took this material, we kept it in a simple format. Instead of giving people books, instead of using projectors, we began to sit around in a circle. We began to discuss the very stuff we're talking about here. We began to answer questions. We began to have them teach the material right off the bat. Seriously. We would teach for one day, and then the rest of the week, we would have them teach the material. And we would engage and go deep on this material. And then what we did is we put together 10 coaching lessons. We have these all online. Everything's for free, by the way. None of this stuff is copyrighted. I'm telling you, you can go to our website today and you can get all our material. We have our material available because we want to disciple leaders. And I have, honestly, I can say all to the glory of God. It's not something we have done. But these guys, They went deep with the few. The first group of 20 people in Uganda, it actually got weeded down to about 10 people. Some people just didn't show up the next year. They got married, or they got to college, or they got a job, or something happened that they just couldn't come back. No problem. We're there for 10 people. It doesn't matter. And we stayed with that. 4 years later, they had brought in 33 different people. One guy was a former imam, had started 5 different mosques. He had become a follower of Jesus. I asked about him recently. He's out there training leaders today. Guys, we've lost track. But because the model is you go deep with a few, this comes from Jesus. This isn't original with Pareto. It's not original with me. The model I'm showing you right now, folks, is exactly what you're seeing here. It's like a little splash, little stone. But you go deep with the few, you make an impact, you lead yourself. The name of the organization is the Reverb Network. If you're interested, we do have newsletters up here on the table for free. This is our last one. This is our last one that we just released, February 2023. You can read up a little bit on our organization, no pressure. We don't actively go out a whole lot and raise funds for it because we really have such a small budget because we've tried to build something that can be reproducible. All right, that's been our goal. But if you're interested in that ministry, you can go to reverbnetwork.org. And I'm going to show you just a quick video here, folks, of, well, it's really a testimony that kind of talks a little bit about us in Africa, and it's this whole idea of going deep with a few. Well, I think we're going to watch a video. There it is.
Walking into a pastor's office in East Africa. He was seated on a large wooden throne in a small room. The rest of us sat below him and around him on white plastic chairs. When an attendant came in, he knelt down before the throne and spoke up to the pastor. You can only imagine my shock, especially since I was scheduled to speak to his church on Jesus serving leadership model. Now, to his credit, 2 days later, this pastor informed his congregation publicly that his leadership was really going to change. The serving leadership model of Jesus is what it will take to change the world. Consider this. We all love to support widows and orphans, and we should. Human compassion requires it, and the Bible commands it. So let's not stop caring for them. But what if I told you that there was a way to address the root issue of their struggle? What if we could reduce the number of widows and orphans in this world by raising up leaders who would work to eradicate their overwhelming needs and suffering? Think about it. If we could raise up godly serving leaders all over the world, we could truly love and serve the broken by minimizing their flesh. We could stop the atrocities of self-serving leaders that create so many widows and orphans in the first place. How many leaders defined by serving rather than self would it take? Millions. Millions of leaders. And that is our dream at the Reverb Network. This is our vision. In Africa alone, my training partner and I have had the privilege of developing around 50 leaders in 3 different countries over a 4-year period. They've gone on to train and develop more than 5,000 other leaders in numerous other countries. We're also initiating similar serving leadership movements in Southeast Asia, and requests from other countries keep coming in. Our concept is simple. Begin serving leadership movements by practicing Jesus' discipleship model of going deep with the few to impact the many to change the world. We don't simply train leaders. We develop leaders over time and empower them to begin multiplicative movements. Through the Reverb Network, Jesus is impacting homes, communities, and now nations around the world. Will you partner with us to raise up godly serving leaders to love the least of these?
So that video was shot about 10 years ago, and I wanted to show it to you because of the throne. And literally, this pastor was sitting on a throne. He had a snakeskin boots. He had a 3-piece suit in the African heat. He was a televangelist. And it literally, when a attendant came in, he bowed down in front of him and spoke up to the pastor. I was jarred. Now, what's interesting is that here in North America, I went to a seminary, and they had big thrones up on the stage for all the important people to sit in. The seminary president, the pastor, you know. And when they asked me to do Bible reading at the seminary, they told me which minor chair I was supposed to sit in. All right, so we're not that far off from this. Let's not be too critical here. And again, here's my point. I really believe the reason we have orphans and widows, and the reason we have so many problems in our world is because of bad leadership. We have self-serving leaders, not serving leaders. We have that at educational levels. We have it at political levels. We have it at business levels. We have it at every society. This is why we need to start leadership movements. This is why we need to raise up Christian serving leaders who can influence all the spheres of society. We believe at going at the root. Again, I'm all for orphans and widows. But folks, that is the end. And if we keep slapping Band-Aids and we don't attack some of these root issues, we're going to keep seeing the wars that are happening in our world. We're going to keep seeing. And let's not kid ourselves. It's in church world too. We love our positions. We love our big chairs. We love our thrones, even if we don't sit on thrones. We like to be called Reverend so-and-so, Pastor so-and-so. This is in business, right? We like to hear our titles. We are self-serving leaders instead of serving leaders. I don't say that critically. We have been blown away by what God is doing. That video said 5,000. It's up over 30,000 from what we know. And again, we don't really know a whole lot because things have gotten kind of out of control. That's what movements do. And we're excited about that. Well, let's get back to your notes. We're saying that self, and that's Jesus. That's the number one. If you want to put the word self in there, you're not Jesus, but you need to learn to lead yourself. In Luke chapter 2, verses 41 to 52, we read that at age 12, he was obedient to his parents, and he increased in wisdom and in favor with God and people. All right? That's leading ourselves, right? And when we lead ourselves, and then later at age 30, he overcomes the 3 temptations, we become a leader worth following. All right, that's number one. Okay, let's go to the next one. The number 3 we say is the inner circle. Who is your inner circle? You know, if you're married, you got a family, I would just say that that's your wife and kids. If you're at business, if you're running a business, if you're in a church, those are your top people. It could be 5, it could be 3, it could be 10, but that's your VPs, it's your key people that you are pouring into most of the time, all right? That's your inner circle. And in Jesus' inner circle, the 3 passages here, this is when Jesus took the 3 into the inner room to raise the little girl from the dead. This is when Jesus went up Mount Transfiguration with Pete, Jim, and John. This is when Jesus went into Gethsemane and he had Pete, Jim, and John with him. Do you remember this? Okay, so we're just saying Jesus spent more time. And what's interesting, when you get to the book of Acts, those 3 guys actually held key leadership positions in the book of Acts. That's what's fascinating, all right, is that the inner circle was developed to become higher level leaders, all right? The next circle that we're looking at here are the disciples, the 12, right? We all know about the 12. And the verses there are just when when Jesus called the 12, when he prayed all night to say, God, give me wisdom to know which 12 to choose. Remember, when you choose leaders, you're also saying to other people, I can't give you as much time. And that's hard. And I don't recommend you doing this with your kids. I don't believe in favoritism, all right? That's not my point. I think all your kids should be treated equally. It's just when it comes to business, when it comes to church, when it comes to community, we have to realize we're limited. We're limited. We really can't be developing everybody, all 200 at the church, all 5,000 at the church, whatever it is, or in our business. I can only go an inch deep, maybe a quarter inch deep if I try that. So I have to go deep with the few to impact the many. All right, so the next one is the appointed ones. All right, the 70 represent the appointed ones. And in Luke chapter 9, Jesus sent out the 12 to do local outreach among the fellow Jews. Okay, so look at Luke chapter 10, he sends out the 70 or the 72. Does that make sense? So in Luke chapter 9, he says, go only to the lost sheep of Israel. But in Luke chapter 10, he says, go into every town and village. You remember this? So it's really Jesus' strategic leadership with the 70. If you go all the way back to Genesis chapter 11, you'll read about the Tower of Babel. And if you look at all the nations that are listed there around the Tower of Babel, there were about 70. Okay? You might remember where they went across the Red Sea and they came to an oasis and there were fountains and trees. Anybody remember how many fountains there were? 12. How many trees were there? 70. All right? Whenever you see 12 and 70, the 12 represents the 12 tribes of Israel, your local ministry. Does that make sense? Israel, right? If you're a Jew, we're reaching our people, and then the 70 represent the nations. And so Jesus is very strategic. He raises up 12. He says, go only to the lost sheep of Israel. Then the 70, he says, go into every town and village, all right? There's a strategic nature to Jesus' leadership. Our leadership, by the way, and I'm just going to say this graciously here, because a lot of times as churches and in ministries, we can be very focused on our Lebanon, right? Jesus says, go to Jerusalem, go to Judea, even Samaria. Samaria is kind of those outlying areas of people we don't like, right? But he also says, go to the ends of the earth, right? Go to all the nations. And our leadership, you know, whether or not you go to the nations, you should be sending people to the nations, or you should be sending finances to the nations, whatever it is, however you can support something among the nations. You also ought to be involved in your Samaria, all right? And Lebanon is important. You should be planted here. That's the 12 going out to their local, but your influence should extend beyond Jerusalem, Judea, and Samaria. Does that make sense? All right. So very strategic nature to Jesus' leadership. And then, of course, we have, after the appointed ones, the 70, we have what we call the early believers. I've used the word missionaries there interchangeably with appointed ones. Early believers, the 120 in the upper room, they're gathered together, and this is, again, I don't know who these 120 were they made up of the 70, probably the 12 were included in there, but you just start to see the ripple effect. Jesus is now gone, and there's only 120 believers, all right? And then that thing explodes and becomes 3,000, right? The new converts at Pentecost in Acts chapter 2:41, all right? What do you think the question mark represents? The outer ring. The future. How about you and me? You and I are on this chart, all right? We're in that last circle, right? Here we are 2,000 years later, and the power of Jesus has influenced our lives, amen? And so we see the question mark being fulfilled by all of us. Literally billions today have been influenced by the ripple effect of Jesus' leadership. Leadership is influence, and leadership begins with me. I need to lead me before I can lead that little guy. All right? I need to be a dad worth following. I need to be a wife worth following, a husband worth following, a spouse, a business person, a community leader, a pastor, you fill in the blank, a teacher worth following. I need to be somebody worth following. I think parenting is really the purest form of leadership, because you don't get to fire or hire your kids, do you? And so really, this is where the test for me has been at. Are my kids choosing to follow me, right? That's the purest form of serving leadership. By the way, I'm really proud, Daniel, you got your little guy, Micaiah. Would we all give it up for Micaiah today? Yeah. We've got a father and son here today, and I think that's the purest form of leadership, right? The influence of a dad with a son, a mom with a son, or mom with a daughter, dad with a daughter. Am I a mom or dad worth following? All right, where are we at for time? 10:24. Yeah, let's jump into the next page there, folks, and leadership defined. All right, that's the next page, is we're going to jump into defining leadership now, okay? Yes, you got a question? Yeah.
Was it Jesus concerned about his message or a person being misconstrued by those who weren't a degree as close as his disciples were?
Yeah, oh, that's a great question. So what happens as the ripple gets out, right? You've got problems with... what's the word? People not getting the message, not getting the pure message. The influence as Jesus gets farther and farther away from those people, what's going to happen? And that's a great concern. I lived in Asia for 10 years, and China has so many cults. We have over 100 million Christians in China. That's amazing. All right, but we also have millions of people in the cults. Here in North America, we've got some cults. We can name them here in the room today, couldn't we? We have some cults, people that are not following Jesus. Here's the point of leadership. There are always risks. And so when we choose one thing, we're always going to have some other outlying problems that could occur that are just going to happen, right? And that's why I said at the beginning, just because, that's why I love Jesus had a Judas. Jesus did everything right. He was Jesus. And he still lost somebody. The son of perdition, I think the Bible says. This guy chose to walk away. People are still going to choose to not follow exactly what Jesus said. And so maybe part of the answer to the question is that's why we have the Word of God, right? We have men of God that were moved by the Holy Spirit to write these things down so that as this ripple effect grew, we could have the word passed on to us. And I honestly think, and I don't know what your church here in Lebanon is all struggling with, but one of the things in Christianity today is we are getting away from what orthodoxy has taught for the last 2,000 years. We're allowing some sins. We have churches that are now affirming certain sins and certain problems in the church today. We're getting away from the historic biblical understanding of the Word of God. And that doesn't mean that we are unkind, unloving, ungracious. Not at all. It just means that if we don't stay aligned to the truth, and I like to say orthodoxy. Orthodoxy is what the church has taught for the last 2,000 years. Okay? You're pretty safe, right? We don't have to debate the Trinity anymore. They took care of that back in the Nicene Creed. We know God is a Trinity. We don't debate that, right? And Christianity for 2,000 years has taught the Trinity. That's why the cults in America today, I don't give them the time of the day because they're messed up on God. Does that make sense? They fall outside of orthodoxy. And so if there's any kind of vice or any kind of thing that falls outside of orthodoxy for the last 2,000 years, I reject it. I hope that makes sense. And I'm not going to go into detail. What was your second question? I think I do. I think that's a beautiful reflection that the Holy Spirit draws us into that inner circle. Yeah. I never thought of that. That's really powerful, Benjamin, right? That's really powerful, Benjamin, because I think Peter maybe talks about he draws us near, or maybe it's the writer of Hebrews. We now can draw near. And the reality is we're all in the inner circle to Jesus. I love this. That's a beautiful reflection. Yep. Amen. 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 Let's give it up for Benjamin. Great reflection. Anybody else have a question? Right here. Yeah. 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 And Jesus even modeled this by sneaking away from the applause. He would always point people to his Father. And so when you run into a leader, and your name again, I'm sorry? Lou. When we run into a problem, what Lou is pointing out, when it's about the leader, and and Paul said, follow me as I follow Christ. There's nothing wrong with following an example, right? We need good leaders to lead up to. But when the leader makes it more about themselves, the organization makes it more about the organization, and we're not ultimately pointing people back to the truth, back to the Word, back to Jesus, guys, we are going to run into problems. People begin to starve. Yeah. Yeah. Boy, these are great reflections. Anyone else? Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. 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 That's really good, Mike. It's Mike, right? Yeah. I can tell stories, and I think we all can, but where there's people that we didn't even know, right? I remember sitting in our church in Chiang Mai one time, Thailand, and there were these Indonesian Christians at Voice of the Martyrs. My dad was with the VOM board up until he passed away in Canada. So I always have had a special place for the persecuted church. And they had brought all these people up from Indonesia that had their arms and legs cut off by Muslim extremists. And they had severely persecuted. And they brought him to Chiang Mai to fit him with prosthetics, okay? And I remember they invited anybody who wanted to come up and just meet and pray with. And I remember putting my arm around this kind of limbless person and just weeping, and just the Spirit was ministering. And I couldn't speak his language, he couldn't speak my language, but we were brothers, right? And we've all had these experiences where we've met somebody for the first time, like me, with a bunch of you here today, and I can sense I'm in the presence of God. The Spirit draws us, the Spirit brings us together, right? We are all draw near, like Jesus said, Mike pointed out in John 16 and 17, that high priestly prayer, right? That they might be one, that they might be one, that they might be one. God brings us together. We are in that inner circle. Yeah. All right, we're going to move on, and we got a half hour before our next break, folks. Serving leadership defined. One of my favorite leadership proverbs does not come from the Bible. Did you hear what I just said? I love the leadership proverbs from the Bible, but one of my favorite ones, that's supposed to be funny, by the way, because it comes from John Maxwell, and it's kind of a funny one. He just said this, and I kind of like it. It's hilarious. He said, "He who thinketh he leadeth, but hath no followers, is simply taking a walk." He even went King Jimmy on it, all right? King James. "He who thinketh he leadeth, but hath no followers, is simply taking a walk." If no one is following you, says John Maxwell, you're not a leader. Right? I remember when I was a kid, and I grew up in Ontario, the snow, it was deep, and we're walking across this field to get to the woods. We're all carrying the chainsaws and the axes because we're going to cut wood so that we have a wood fire, all right? And I know here in the U.S. you call it the woods, but we were going to the bush. Up in Canada, you call it the bush. And we're walking across, and my dad, he's taking big steps, and us little guys are coming on behind, and we're trying to get into those because the snow is so deep. And I said, "Dad, slow down. I can't get my feet in your steps." And Dad would always use that as a leadership lesson, because sometimes as leaders, we have to slow down. We have to allow people to stay with us, to keep up with us, right? Jesus, he's going out in front of his disciples. He calls them to follow him, but he doesn't go so fast and so hard that they can't keep up with him, right? And we as leaders need to understand that if we are running ahead, if we got vision and dreams and we got all these ideas and we're running so far out ahead and we're not slowing down to where our people are at, we're not going to have influence with them. Do you ever meet a leader that's got all these great ideas and vision and passion, and he's just like gangbuster gung-ho? I mean, I'm kind of that guy that's A-type driven, and all at once I'm like, oh, no one's following me. That's a problem. Leadership is influence. Guys, I want you to take a moment, jump into your groups right now. We have at the top of page 2 the influence discussion. And what I'd like you to do is ask the questions in your group and answer the questions. Who influenced you the most when you were growing up? Now, I'll just tell you real quick, for me, one of my favorite people in the entire planet is a lady by the name of Jean Erb. Jean Erb was my grade 6 vacation Bible school teacher. She believed in me. And I was not a real nice guy in grade 6 vacation Bible school, but she hung in there with me. I eventually joined the choir that sang at her church. Jean Erb was an orator. That means that she had a voice. She was the one that got all the speaking parts. She was the one that could reduce the crowd to tears because she had ethos and pathos and all kinds of os in her voice, okay? She was amazing. Now, you got to know, I'm a baritone. You know what a baritone is? Barely a tone. Okay, you're not high enough for tenor, you're not low enough for bass. And so I'm kind of in the choir, but I'm singing pretty quiet. I'm just a baritone. And Jean Erb goes to the director and says, "I think Luke should have one of my speaking parts." Now, guys, I want you to know something. I didn't see myself as a speaker. I didn't realize I had any ability to speak in front of a group or to use my voice. I obviously wasn't a singer, but I was in the choir because there were some really cute girls. But some of you got that. Jean Erb goes to the director and says, "I think Jean Erb has believed in me. Jean Erb challenges and cheers me on Facebook. Jean Erb is someone I look up to, I honor, I respect. She is somebody that had a tremendous influence on my life. And she's just a mom, raising kids, good lady, and she had tremendous influence." Are you with me? I want you to talk about that. Now, I want to say one more thing. Another question here is, Think of a person who had a negative influence in your life, and what ways did they affect you? Did you know that in my community, even somebody from Gene's church who had a positional, powerful leadership, I'm not going to name the name, but this person came to me when I was like 19, and something this person did not agree with me on said, I wash my hands of you, Luke. Do you think that person had a lot of influence in my life? Now I want to tell you, I made up. I wrote him a letter. Everything's forgiven. In fact, just a few weeks ago, I visited this person. I'm not angry, bitter, but that person had very little influence. I will never follow that person's leadership model. I'm just being honest. Here's a lady with no position, no title, who has had tremendous influence. Somebody else who had the title, the position, the power, and has basically no influence. I'm not following that person. Are you with me? Negative. What's the third question? This is the one I want you to answer as well. How has Jesus influenced your leadership personally? If you have time for that one, go ahead and answer that. We're going to take about 5 minutes, and that means that everybody at the table gets about 1 minute. And the way we're going to make this work, I want everybody to take their finger and point it to the sky right now. Point it to the sky. Everybody, one finger, point it to the sky. On the count of 3, you are going to point at somebody around your table who's going to be your group facilitator and is going to lead the discussion. That means they're going to start out, and they're going to make everybody else talk after they're done, all right? So are you ready? We're going to vote somebody in right now. 1, 2, 3, boom! Who has the most fingers pointed at? If you've got the most fingers pointed at you, you are elected. That means you go first and answer those questions and then make everybody else talk, okay? That's your goal. 5 minutes. Mike, we're going to shut down for 5 minutes, all right? Forgot to warn you. If you're watching online, you're just going to go get a coffee. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to continue on. My guess is that in your conversation had a lot to do with people you had relationship with, right? Might have been a grandpa, might have been a uncle, it might have been an aunt, it might have been a school teacher, maybe a coach. But typically they're people that we have relationship with, right? That's really where we learn most of our life skills. Our life is because we interact. Relational. So remember, the relational authority is much greater than our positional authority, all right? Nothing wrong with positions and titles, but relational authority is the people that have influenced us the most, all right? So leadership is influence. So think about relational also in terms of life role leadership, right? The roles that I have in the life of another. We could call it life role leadership versus positional. Every person that I meet, everyone that I come in contact with, when I was about 10 or 11 or 12, I don't exactly remember the age I was, but there was a really tall guy from Germany that visited in our home. And anybody know his name? Hans. They're all Hans from Germany, okay? I'm German, so I can pick on my own peeps, right? But Hans from Germany, really tall guy. My dad, like I said, was with Voice of the Martyrs. So we had all these interesting people come through our home. But as us boys were scampering off the bed, right? Adults were having their talk, and you guys need to go off the bed. Hans comes around, and I lived in an old farmhouse, and he opens the door, yells up the steps at us boys in his thick German accent. Boys, turn to Psalm 119 and memorize. Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. Uh-oh. What do we know about Psalm 119? The longest chapter in the Bible. Thankfully, he said verse 9 and 10. And you know what? I learned it. And back then, the version of Bible I had was a King James. I can quote that to you word for word. Wherewithal shall a young man cleanse his way, by taking heed thereto according to thy word. With my whole heart have I sought thee. Oh, let me not wander from thy commandments. When a man like a tall man from Germany named Hans tells you to memorize, you do it when you're 12 years old. And I never forgot that. A number of years ago, my wife and I were celebrating our 25th wedding anniversary in Estes Park, Colorado. We were having lunch, and there was a young family there from Texas. They had a young son, and it was their last of their children. And as we were having lunch, that memory came back to me, and I said, young man, I want you to learn some verses. I want you to turn to Psalm 119. I want you to memorize verse 9 and 10 and never forget them. A couple months later, I got an email from the dad. He said, that was so powerful. Thank you so much for influencing and impacting my son's life. I want to tell you something. Every one of us has influence. We all have an impact. We are meeting people on a regular basis. Every time you go through the Walmart, you notice her name and you say it. Every time you go through a Sheet station and you notice his name and you say it. Every time that you take a moment to stop and to look that homeless person in the eyes and smile and wish them a good day. And if you have more time, take them out for a meal and get to hear their story. Every moment is an act of influence. It is leadership. You are having life role with every person you meet. Never minimize the power of what you have. That man, Hans, has no idea that I had dedicated the rest of my life to teaching and explaining the Word of God. This fall, I'm becoming a campus pastor at our church in Chicago. I'm walking away from a lot of my business stuff that I've been doing. I'm going to still be doing some of it, but I'm going to become more and more involved. And I used to be involved in what people call, I think everything is full-time ministry, by the way. I used to be in full-time ministry and missions. I was a missionary director, yada, yada, yada. And came back. I started to work a lot in the business world. I actually teach. This week, I've been working with a number of businesses, teaching them how to lead, love, and serve like Jesus in their business. I use Jesus in the business world all the time. I just want you to know that. And it's relevant. Jesus is relevant from Monday through Friday, not just Sunday. And I believe we're all in full-time ministry. But I want to tell you something. I'm excited. I'm excited about this new season in my life where I get to speak directly to people, preach, teach. I love the Word of God. And it's influenced me. Hans had no idea when he said those, wherewithal shall a young man cleanse his way, by taking heed thereto according to thy word, with my whole heart. Guys, you have no idea the influence, the impact that Hans had in my life. You have influence. You have leadership with every moment you've got with people. Life role leadership based on relationship. Positional is based on title and position. There's nothing wrong. We exercise leadership in both areas. But folks, if you have to tell people I'm your boss, you probably have positional leadership figured out only, and you are missing what serving leadership, what Jesus on leadership is all about. It's about relationship. It's about investing in people. There's nothing wrong with a formal position, but we have so much more than that. We could take time to go back into a group and talk, but I think for the sake of time, if you don't mind, we're going to keep moving on here, folks, all right? And so I want to get a definition of serving leadership down. Our key leadership text. Would somebody want to just stand up and read this from Matthew 20, 25 to 28? And before you do that, you'll notice that little cross that says application questions. That's pointing you back to page 1. Every once in a while throughout our material, now guys, I need to tell you something. We take 4 years to teach this. We take an entire 2 or 3 days to usually teach all this material. All right? We're doing it in an 8-hour day here. So there's going to be some things we're not going to be able to do. All right? But those, whenever you see a little cross, that's pointing you back to page 1, and you'll see application questions. Okay? And on your own, you can go deep into these texts, and you can answer those questions. For right now, we're just going to read the text. This to us is kind of the foundational text on our leadership definition. So who are you that wants to stand up and read it loud and clear? Thank you, brother. All right.
Jesus called them together and said, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lorded over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be your slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and give his life as a ransom.
Thank you so much, brother. Jesus is acknowledging the Gentiles. This is how they rule. This is how they lead. He's not saying it doesn't work. It does. Leadership in the world, leadership not by the book, it works. You can do leadership that way. But he said, if you are my disciple, and I love the way this brother, is it Mike? Are you also Mike? You're Keith. I'm sorry. Keith said, not so with you. Did you notice how he slowed? We need to hear that. Not so with you. If you want to be a dad, a mom, a boss, a foreman, you want to be an educator who leads, loves, and serves like Jesus, you're not going to do it like the Gentiles. No, you are going to be like Jesus. If you want to be great, you'll be a servant. Whoever wants to be first must be your slave. The Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve. If you want to be a disciple, you choose his definition of leadership. Now, folks, our definition of serving leadership, you can see it there on the page. It's basically broken down into 3 parts. A serving leader is someone worth following. I think we've covered that pretty clearly, haven't we, in the first part of our day today. Someone worth following. The second part is who accomplishes a higher purpose. Leadership's not about me. It's about something bigger than me. It's about this thing called the kingdom of God, right? I'm here to influence people toward a better and a higher purpose. And then how do we do that? Serving leaders are always about developing people. It's not about them. It's about developing others. Jesus said, greater works you will do when I go back to the Father. So serving leadership, someone worth following, what do? They accomplish higher purposes than themselves. And what do? They develop other people. All right, that's as simple as it gets. And we're going to move on from that. But I do want to share just a quick story with you from John Maxwell's book, The 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. There was this guy by the name of Robert Guazeta. How many of you love Coca-Cola, by the way? I'm a bit of a Coke guy, so I see you, my friend. Coke is it, all right? I love Coca-Cola. And Robert Guazeta was the CEO of Coca-Cola between 1980 and 1997. And in 1997, Guazeta was diagnosed with cancer, and he passed away 6 weeks later. It was that fast. Right? It was incredibly fast. And what's so surprising is that Coca-Cola stock barely hiccuped. Now, you would think if they had a leader that led that company, made them a global international enterprise for 17 years, passes away within 6 weeks, you think that the shareholders, you think that stock, you think everything would fall, wouldn't you? But it didn't. You know why? Because for years and years, Guazeta, without even knowing that he had cancer, had been developing, he had been grooming, he had been raising up a successor. He had been developing a guy by the name of Doug Ivester. Doug Ivester, as he rose up through the ranks of Coca-Cola, Guazeta would send him off to Europe and say, you run the European division. You need some experience, international. He would give him opportunities to develop and to grow. But it hadn't begun with Guazeta. Oh, no. You see, this had all been started way back in the 70s with the Coca-Cola patriarch by the name of Robert W. Woodruff. Woodruff, you see, had set Guazeta up for success. He had poured into Guazeta. He had set him up, and so when Guazeta took the helm, he said, I'm here to develop leaders. I'm here to raise up somebody who can take this on after I'm gone. And so when Guazeta was taken out of the game of life within 6 weeks, Iverson stepped up to the plate and was able to lead. And Coca-Cola stock barely hiccuped. And by the way, Iverson wasn't even that great a leader. He didn't even last that long at Coca-Cola. The point that I want to make, and believe me, it's pretty hard to run a corporation, an international corporation. Even though Guazeta developed, poured into him, and Iverson didn't do a bad job. It's just it's hard to lead a global corporation. The point is, he had been developing him for years. And the stockbrokers, the trust was very high on what Guazeta had done. Folks, if you want to be a leader worth following, you are about a higher purpose that develops other people. You are the kind of person that has a successor. Successful people have successors. Here's a great quote by Winston Churchill, because he captured this definition when he said, we make a living by what we get, but we make a life by what we give. Let me say that again. We make a living by what we get. We make a life by what we give. By what we give. Churchill understood the importance of leading for a higher purpose, giving instead of getting. All right, let's talk the next diagram here in your notes, the two roles of serving leadership, the shepherding and the stewarding. Here's a comic on the screen that kind of shows you what is often a problem present in much of our leadership today. I don't want to change, says the leader, but I want all of you to change, right? Dad and mom, right? I want you to do this, but even though my model doesn't exude that, all right? And we're using this to introduce the concepts of shepherding and stewarding, because this guy is obviously not doing either, all right? Effective change happens when a leader models it in the stewardship and the shepherding stages of leadership. Now, what do we mean by the shepherding and the stewarding? In your diagram, you are going to see that it says a shepherd provides purpose and direction or vision, all right? And what does a steward do? They empower others to accomplish the mission. So if you're in a shepherding role, that's your first role. As a shepherd, you are giving direction to your sheep. You are leading them from the front, right? And the sheep follow your direction. And if you live in the Middle East, you know that shepherds have a much different green pastures than what we have here in Lebanon, Pennsylvania. Here it's pretty nice and green. Over there's a lot of desert. And what a shepherd would do, when it talks about daily bread, a shepherd would take his sheep from one little rock to another little rock, and he would help them find the little bits of green grass that were scattered throughout the desert. And at night, they didn't have all kinds of woods around like we do here in Lebanon. It was mountains and deserts and sand and rocks, and they would have to build an enclosure for their sheep to protect, because that's what a shepherd does. They protect their sheep, right? Now, how do you build an enclosure? How do you build a gate when all you've got is rocks? You don't. You get an enclosure, you get all your sheep safely inside, and then what do you do as a shepherd? You lay in the gate, Mike. That's exactly right. You lay in the gate. And you take one for the team. Not over my dead body. Maybe that's where that statement came from. What do you think? A shepherd defends his sheep. He's there to protect them. He's out front. Remember the Chuck Colson quote? I know all the kings of the earth that I know all sent their people to die for them. I only know one king, Jesus, who went out to die for his people. If you're a leader, you're a shepherd, you're going to protect, you're going to be out front, you're going to cast vision and direction, you become a leader worth following. And that's what shepherd leaders do. The pyramid stands. Look at the next diagram. The leader's at the top. The leader shares the vision. And the followers say, do I want to support this vision? Do I want to follow this leader? Is he somebody worth following, right? That's what a shepherd leader does. They cast vision. They give mission. It's very top-down. There's nothing wrong with a top-down pyramid in leadership when it comes to casting vision. Those leaders care for their people. They're empowering their people. We call this the strategic role of serving leadership. But then we have to flip the pyramid, right? This is where the traditional pyramid gets flipped. And now in the stewarding role, I've got to steward this responsibility. God has given me this responsibility, this opportunity, and I have to steward it well. A steward multiplies things. A steward takes something from here and builds it up to here. A steward is responsible, and how do they do it? They flip the pyramid, and they say to their people, how can I support you? What can I do to train you? What kind of resources do you need from me? Do you need my time? Do you need more training? Do you need this? What do you need? Right? I'm here to support you. And so leadership now becomes a partnership. The leader is a shepherd, yes, but they're partnering with their people to accomplish a mission. It's called stewardship. And now the leader is down here supporting his people or her people. A leader supports. It's a partnership, right? And we implement the mission together. We call this the operational role of leadership. Strategic, leader at the top. Operational, leader at the bottom. Does that make sense? Strategic and operational leadership. Top and bottom, the pyramid, all right? And you need both roles in any company or organization, all right? Now, why is this so important to understand flipping the pyramid? Have you ever been with a business or been in an organization where everybody practices a popular sport of boss watching? Whatever the boss does and whatever makes the boss happy. I was doing a business seminar up in Canada, and this gal came up to me at the break. She said, I used to work in a super toxic environment. My director would go into a meeting, and my director would say to us, below her, she would say, you're here to make me look good. And if we didn't do the reports right or we didn't do this right, and it didn't matter how bad she did and the director did in the meeting, they were blamed, right? It was always came back on them. She said it was the most toxic environment I've ever worked in, right? Because it was all about making the boss look good. Boss watching. Ken Blanchard likes to talk about it as a duck pond. Quack, quack, it's our policy. Quack, quack, I just work here. Quack, quack, I don't make the rules. Quack, quack, it's what the boss wants. And it really comes back on the boss. The boss is the one that's made those people ducks, right? Quack, quack, it's a duck pond. You want to talk to my supervisor? Quack, quack, quack. Blanchard says, do you want to work in a duck pond? Do you want a leader that develops ducks? No. He says, we need a serving leader at the helm who can raise up eagle leaders. Eagles that can get out there and soar. Eagles that can go after something. Eagles that have been empowered. Eagle leaders. That's what a serving leader develops. People that can soar. People that can fly even much farther than them. They set others up for success. We need to help people soar like eagles instead of quacking like ducks. And how do we do that? Well, I'm going to give you another business example. Folks, I apologize. I use a lot of business examples because I'm in the business world about 80-90% of the time. But Jesus did this, right? He would send the guys out, and they would go and they would say things like, oh my goodness, we saw the demons come out. We saw people healed. We saw the raised from the dead. It was amazing, Jesus. And then he would coach them, and he'd say things like, that's awesome, but remember, your names are written in the book of life. That's the most important thing. Do you remember this? Kind of a coach. And then he would train them some more. Remember that story where they couldn't cast out the demon? They had been casting out demons. Jesus says, hey, this kind comes out by prayer and fasting. Jesus is giving them some coaching. He's developing them before he sends them out into the world and when he leaves, right? The Great Commission. And when he leaves, I think to Mike's point, he sends his Holy Spirit, right? Or maybe it was Benjamin over here. But we want to help our people soar like eagles and not quack like ducks. And the example I like to use is Nordstrom. This Nordstrom just has a really great policy. They have like one rule, which is just do whatever is best in the moment. They train their people, do whatever is best in the moment. There are no additional rules. That's like the Nordstrom rule. It's kind of cool. And they train their people to think like eagles. So somebody comes into a Nordstrom store one time and says, hey, do you guys have this perfume? And the lady behind the counter said, oh, I'm so sorry, we really don't have it. By the way, how long are you going to be in the store? About 30 minutes, said the customer. Okay, well, please check back with me before you leave. Guess what the lady behind the counter did with Annette? She asked somebody, hey, could you watch my till for me? I'm going to go out. And she goes out into the mall. She finds the perfume. She buys it. She includes the original receipt. And when the customer comes back 30 minutes later, she had bought the perfume that lady was seeking. And she charged her exactly the amount that she had paid for it. Now, did Nordstrom teach her to do that? Not at all. But they had empowered her to be an eagle. Do you think that they raised up a gung-ho raving fan customer at Nordstrom? Absolutely. I could tell you stories about different brands and why some of those brands are so amazing, because they go the extra mile. They train their people. Do you ever meet people and they say, customer service, well, our policy forbids us to do that. Are there exceptions to the rules? All right. Thank you, Nordstrom, for teaching us on serving leadership. Great story. They empowered eagle leaders, not quacking ducks. And I think their success is reflected in an increased bottom line as well. We're going to finish this session. It's 11 o'clock. Are you guys okay if we just go a few minutes over to finish this here at the bottom? Is that all right? All right, and then we'll get you out of here for a break. Quick look at our framework, because this is where we're going to go for the rest of the day. We're going to do the be, the know. Well, I think we are. What did I do wrong here? Oh, yeah, there it is. The be, the heart, the know, the head, and the do. It's real simple, real easy to remember, right? Leadership begins in my heart, my motives. Why do I lead? We're going to look at the being part. We're going to have a lot of fun with that one. And then we're going to go to the know. What do I know? What's my vision? What are my beliefs? And then we're going to do the action, the doing part of leadership. We're going to look at those three pillars. And then that arrow is like the disciplines that all serving leaders should have. At the end of each section, we're going to look at some disciplines, some practical ways to practice serving leadership. All right? So there's going to be disciplines at the end of each section. So that's where we're going for the rest of our time. And before we close and go for break, just a few things. If you only have the right beliefs about leadership, okay, look at the diagram. If you've got the head right, you're a leader who knows, you believe the right stuff, and you're a go-getter. You execute, you do things. You are a person who does, but you don't have the heart. You don't have a love and a compassion. You don't have the right motives. You're smart, you're a go-getter, but you don't have the heart. What kind of a leader are you? You're an inauthentic leader. And we want to follow authentic leaders today, don't we? We want people that have authenticity. They've got the heart. They're real. They care. They're genuinely involved. All right, let's try the next one. If we have the heart, we love people, we're full of heart, we got the right motives, and we get things done. We jump right into stuff, but we never think through. We're not very strategic. We do dumb decisions, and people are like, whoa, why did they do that? What kind of a leader would you call that? Anybody want to take a guess? A mess. Okay, what was that? A sloppy leader. That's a good one. Anyone else? I got a word that starts with an I. Okay, we're gonna get to that one in just a moment. This one we call illogical, right? They don't make. They're just. We like to follow logical leaders, don't we? We want to follow a logical leader. Now the last one, what was the word? Incompetent. That's the last one, because if we have the. We're a good person. We love people. We got the heart, and we think through stuff, but then we can't pull the trigger. We can't do something. One of my friends, we share the stage a lot. His name is Dave Kaufman. He loves to tell the story. He's a coach. He's a high-level business coach, and he had a client from France. And this guy had a multi-million-dollar entrepreneurial idea that was going to make a lot of money. It was a great business concept. And my friend Dave was coaching this guy. And the guy just kept finessing the logo and finessing the colors and changing this little thing. And Dave coached him and said, listen, you got to get it to market. Someone else is going to beat you to it. It's a great idea. You got to get it to market. You got to pull the trigger. You got to execute. You got to do. Because leaders who don't do are incompetent. They could be wonderful people. They could be really smart people. They could be all those things. But if you don't pull the trigger, if you don't do, you're incompetent. And we don't want to follow incompetent leaders. We want to follow what? Logical, authentic, competent leaders. Amen? And Jesus teaches us this concept of the head, the heart, the hands. That's where we're going for the rest of our time. Now, you want to know about the guy from France? My friend Dave fired him. Did you ever hear of a coach firing a client? Coaches make a lot of money on their clients. Dave got so fed up, he said, I'm done. And he walked away from the client. He just said, you're not pulling the trigger. I'm done. I'm not wasting any more of your money. And the guy called him up like a year later, and he's crying on the phone. And he said, somebody beat me to it. Guys, I'm telling you, you got to be a leader that pulls a trigger even when things are not perfect. And I'm a bit of a perfectionist, so I know what I'm talking about. Sometimes it's hard for us to actually get out there and do, it has to be perfect first. No, it doesn't. And that comes back to Benjamin's point. You know that whole thing of everything's going to be perfect and everyone's going to get it and the whole thing is going to make sense. No, life is messy. Life is messy. Leadership is messy because leadership is with people, and people are messy. And we sometimes make mistakes. All right? So we're going to go with this for the rest of our time together, the authentic, the logical, the competent. Before you go on a break, just a few more things, guys. At the end of this section, you are going to see at the bottom it says personal commitment. Do you all see that? That means go back to page 1, and it says personal commitment. What needs to change in my life based on what I have just learned? What needs to change in my life based on what I've learned this morning? I want you to take just a moment and to fill in one statement, all right? And then during the break, I want you to find somebody and tell that person what needs to change in my life. It's called accountability, right? And that's a good thing. So to write something down, what needs to change, and then tell your learning partner before you go on break. Is that cool? All right. Okay, so you can take a break, and we'll be back here at, it's 11:09, folks, and so we're going to come back at 11:20. Is that cool? 11:20, 10-minute break, 11:20, and then we'll wrap up the morning with 55 minutes and then go for lunch, all right? Those of you that are online, thank you for joining us once again, and you're welcome to take a 10-minute break. We're going to fire this back up again at 11:20, all right? You're dismissed.